Thousands of children dreamed of becoming Hollywood stars. A lucky few actually did. Their faces filled movie screens, their names appeared in headlines, and millions watched them grow up. But for many, the applause faded far sooner than anyone expected. Today, some rest in quiet cemeteries, others have no marked grave at all, and their final resting places receive only a fraction of the attention their childhood fame once commanded. These are the forgotten child stars whose stories deserve to be remembered once again. Number 1. Jackie Coogan. Long before Hollywood learned how to protect child actors, one little boy became one of the biggest stars in the world. Jackie Coogan captured millions of hearts in Charlie Chaplin's The Kid, turning him into one of cinema's first true child superstars. By the time he was a teenager, he had earned a fortune that most adults could only dream of. Yet the legacy he left behind had little to do with money or fame. As Jackie grew older, Hollywood's attention shifted to younger faces, and the roles became harder to find. Then came an even greater shock. After reaching adulthood, he discovered that most of the money he had earned as a child had already been spent by his mother and stepfather. The lawsuit that followed shocked the public, and eventually led to California's Coogan Act, requiring part of every child actor's earnings to be protected. Unlike many former child stars, Jackie found a second life on screen decades later as Uncle Fester in The Addams Family. Many viewers recognized the character but never realized he was once the little boy who had helped change Hollywood forever. When Jackie Coogan died in 1984 at the age of 69, he was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. His grave is simple and receives far less attention than many neighboring Hollywood legends. Yet beneath that modest marker rests the child whose painful experience forever changed the way young performers are protected. His movies introduced him to the world, but it was the injustice he suffered that became his greatest legacy. Today, countless child actors benefit from a law bearing his name, even as the little boy who inspired it is remembered by far fewer people than he once was. Number 2. Bobby Driscoll. For millions of children, Bobby Driscoll was the face of Disney's golden age. He starred in Treasure Island, won a Special Academy Award as a child actor, and became the model and voice for Disney's animated Peter Pan. At a time when it seemed his future had no limits, Bobby was one of the most recognizable young stars in America, but unlike Peter Pan, he couldn't remain a child forever. As Bobby entered his teenage years, Disney chose not to renew his contract. His appearance had changed, major roles disappeared, and Hollywood quickly turned its attention to younger faces. Struggling to rebuild his career, he became involved with drugs and legal troubles, drifting farther from the industry that had once celebrated him. In March 1968, Bobby died at just 31 years old from complications related to drug use. The tragedy became even more heartbreaking because he carried no identification. His body went unidentified, and he was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave on Hart Island in New York before his family even knew he had died. Only later did fingerprint records finally reveal his identity. Unlike the elaborate memorials of many Hollywood legends, Bobby Driscoll has no individual gravestone for fans to visit. The child who once gave life to Peter Pan now rests in one of America's largest public burial grounds, where countless unnamed individuals were laid to rest. His films continue to introduce new generations to his talent, yet few realize what became of the boy behind those unforgettable performances. Bobby Driscoll's story remains one of Hollywood's most painful reminders that child fame could disappear long before childhood memories ever did. Number 3. Heather O'Rourke. Millions of horror fans still remember the little girl who softly whispered, "They're here." That single line made Heather O'Rourke the unforgettable face of Poltergeist and one of Hollywood's most recognizable child stars of the 1980s. But while rumors later surrounded her death, the truth was far more tragic than any ghost story. Discovered at just 5 years old, Heather quickly became a favorite of audiences with her natural charm and bright personality. Her performance as Carol Ann Freeling turned her into an overnight star, and she returned for 2 Poltergeist sequels while continuing to appear in television series and commercials. It seemed she had a long career ahead of her. In early 1988, Heather suddenly became seriously ill. Doctors initially believed she had the flu, but she was actually suffering from a rare congenital intestinal condition that led to septic shock. She died on February 1, 1988, at only 12 years old, just months before Poltergeist III was released. Her death fueled the so-called Poltergeist curse, but no evidence has ever confirmed that supernatural theory. Heather was laid to rest at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. Surrounded by the graves of many famous Hollywood figures, her simple resting place often receives far less attention than the movie that made her famous. More than 3 decades later, audiences still recognize the frightened little girl speaking to the television screen, yet far fewer remember Heather O'Rourke herself, whose brief life ended long before she had the chance to grow beyond the role that made her unforgettable. Number 4. Judith Barsi. Even if you don't recognize Judith Barsi's face, you've almost certainly heard her voice. She brought Ducky to life in The Land Before Time and Anne-Marie in All Dogs Go to Heaven, creating characters that generations of children still love today. Tragically, Judith never lived to see the lasting impact of those performances. Judith began acting in commercials before becoming a familiar face on television and in films. By the age of 10, she had appeared in dozens of productions and was considered one of Hollywood's brightest young talents. Behind the scenes, however, her family life was far from the happy image audiences imagined. Her father had become increasingly violent, and despite growing concerns from people close to the family, the abuse continued. On July 25, 1988, Judith and her mother were murdered by her father before he took his own life. Judith was only 10 years old. Just a few months later, The Land Before Time reached theaters, followed by All Dogs Go to Heaven, allowing her gentle voice to live on even after her life had been cut tragically short. Judith and her mother were laid to rest together at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Hollywood Hills, California. Although devoted fans still leave flowers and small toys at the site, her grave receives only a fraction of the attention given to many Hollywood legends nearby. Her characters continue to comfort children around the world, but far fewer people know the little girl behind those unforgettable voices. Judith Barsi's legacy survives through the joy she brought to others, making the silence surrounding her final resting place all the more heartbreaking. Number 5. Jackie Cooper. Before he was known as Perry White in Superman, Jackie Cooper was one of the biggest child stars Hollywood had ever seen. At just 9 years old, he became one of the youngest performers ever nominated for an Academy Award for his unforgettable role in Skippy. His natural performances made him a favorite with audiences and proved that a child could carry an entire film. Success came quickly, but childhood fame also came with a price. Years later, Jackie revealed that directors sometimes used fear and emotional pressure to make him cry on camera. In one famous story from his autobiography, he recalled being told that his beloved dog would be taken away if he didn't deliver the emotional performance they wanted. The scene worked, but it also exposed the harsh reality behind Hollywood's golden age. Unlike many child stars of his generation, Jackie successfully reinvented himself as an adult actor, television director, and producer. A new generation recognized him as the editor of the Daily Planet in the Superman films, often unaware that he had once been one of the most famous children in America. Jackie Cooper died in 2011 at the age of 88. He was laid to rest at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, reflecting his service in the U.S. Navy as much as his remarkable film career. His grave is dignified yet understated, giving little indication that one of Hollywood's greatest child stars rests there. Today, his Academy Award nomination and groundbreaking performances remain part of film history. Yet many people remember the characters Jackie Cooper played without realizing how much he helped shape the history of child actors long before Hollywood learned to protect them. Number 6. Brandon DeWilde. One of the most unforgettable moments in classic Western history ends with a young boy desperately calling, "Shane, come back." That emotional scene made Brandon DeWilde a star almost overnight. His performance in Shane earned him an Academy Award nomination at just 11 years old, making him one of the youngest nominees in Oscar history. Unlike many child actors, Brandon continued working as he grew older, appearing in films, television series, and stage productions. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never escape the shadow of Shane. Audiences continued to remember the little boy from the famous Western, while his later work received far less attention. On July 6, 1972, Brandon's life was cut short in a traffic accident near Denver, Colorado. He was only 30 years old. His sudden death ended a career that many believed still had untapped potential, leaving behind the image of a child forever frozen in one of Hollywood's greatest films. Brandon DeWilde was laid to rest at Pine Lawn Memorial Park and Arboretum in Farmingdale, New York. His grave is quiet and rarely mentioned among the resting places of Hollywood's biggest legends, despite the lasting impact of the film that introduced him to the world. More than 70 years after Shane first reached theaters, millions still recognize that heartbreaking final scene. Yet far fewer remember the young actor whose performance made it unforgettable. Brandon DeWilde's resting place remains a quiet reminder that even an Oscar-nominated child star can slowly fade from public memory, while the role that made him famous lives on. Number 7. Anissa Jones. To millions of television viewers, Anissa Jones was the sweet little Buffy Davis on Family Affair. Week after week, audiences watched her grow up on one of America's most popular sitcoms, making her one of the best-known child stars of the late 1960s. But once the cameras stopped rolling, the life everyone assumed she would have never arrived. When Family Affair ended in 1971, Anissa chose to leave acting behind and hoped to live a normal life. Instead, she struggled with the pressures of sudden adulthood, family conflicts, and the expectations that had followed her since childhood. At 18, she finally gained access to the money she had earned during her career, but the freedom she had waited for came with new challenges. On August 28, 1976, Anissa died from an accidental drug overdose. She was only 18 years old. Her death shocked many who had remembered her as the cheerful little girl from television, becoming one of Hollywood's earliest reminders of how difficult life after childhood fame could be. Unlike most stars featured in this video, Anissa has no grave for fans to visit. She was cremated and her ashes were scattered over the Pacific Ocean. There is no headstone, no cemetery path, and no quiet memorial where admirers can leave flowers or pay their respects. Today, reruns of Family Affair continue introducing Buffy Davis to new audiences, yet the young actress behind that beloved character has largely faded from public memory, leaving no physical resting place to remind visitors that one of television's brightest child stars was once here. Number 8. Carl Alfalfa Switzer. With his spiky hair, freckled face, and unforgettable voice, Carl Alfalfa Switzer became one of the most recognizable children in Hollywood through the Our Gang comedy shorts. His awkward charm and endless attempts to impress Darla made Alfalfa a character audiences still remember nearly a century later. But while the character never seemed to grow up, the boy behind him struggled to leave childhood fame behind. As Carl became an adult, Hollywood offered fewer opportunities. No matter what role he played, producers and audiences still saw Alfalfa. He took small acting jobs while working as a hunting guide and dog trainer to support himself, hoping to build a life beyond the character that had made him famous. On January 21, 1959, Carl was shot and killed during a dispute over money connected to a hunting dog. He was only 31 years old. Authorities ruled the shooting to be self-defense, although parts of the case have remained the subject of debate over the years. Whatever the circumstances, his life ended far from the bright comedy that had made him a household name. Carl Switzer was laid to rest at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. His grave includes an image of a hunting dog, reflecting the work that had become an important part of his life after Hollywood. Despite resting in one of America's most famous celebrity cemeteries, his grave receives far less attention than many stars buried nearby. Today, millions still recognize Alfalfa's face and laugh at his classic performances. Yet far fewer know the story of Carl Switzer, the young actor whose most famous role outlived the man himself. Number 9. George Spanky McFarland. Few child stars were as instantly recognizable as George "Spanky" McFarland. As one of the biggest stars of our gang, his cheerful smile and quick wit made him a favorite of movie audiences throughout the 1930s. For many Americans, Spanky became the face of childhood itself, appearing in dozens of comedy shorts that are still watched today. Unlike many of his fellow Our Gang cast members, George remained connected to the entertainment industry after his childhood career ended. He worked in television, radio, and public appearances, often embracing the nickname that had followed him since he was a little boy. But no matter how much time passed, the public continued to see him as Spanky rather than the man he had become. George McFarland died on June 30th, 1993, at the age of 64 after suffering a heart attack. While his passing received attention from longtime fans, it also reminded many people how completely our gang had become a piece of Hollywood history rather than a living memory. He was cremated, and his ashes were later interred at Texas State Cemetery in Austin, Texas. Although the cemetery honors many important figures in Texas history, his resting place receives far less attention than the Hollywood fame he once enjoyed as one of America's best-known child actors. Today, the nickname Spanky remains more famous than George McFarland himself. His performances continue to entertain new generations, but many viewers never learn the story of the little boy behind the laughter, or where he finally came to rest. Number 10. Darla Hood. For millions of moviegoers, Darla Hood was the sweet little girl who stole Alfalfa's heart in the Our Gang comedies. Her smile, confidence, and natural screen presence made her one of the series' most beloved child stars. Even today, many people remember Darla long before they remember the actress who brought the character to life. After leaving Our Gang, Darla refused to let childhood fame define the rest of her life. She continued performing as a singer, appeared in films and television, and spent years entertaining audiences in nightclubs and stage productions. Although she remained active in show business, she never again reached the extraordinary popularity she had enjoyed as a child. In June 1979, Darla underwent surgery that was expected to be routine. Unexpected complications followed, and she died of heart failure at just 47 years old. Her sudden passing shocked many longtime fans, ending a career that had stretched from Hollywood's golden age into television. Darla Hood was laid to rest at Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. She rests in the same historic cemetery as Carl Alfalfa Switzer, the boy whose character had spent years trying to win Darla's affection on screen. Yet while visitors often recognize the famous Our Gang characters, far fewer stop to remember the real actress behind one of the series' most unforgettable faces. Nearly a century after Our Gang first appeared, Darla continues to make audiences smile. But the little girl who once stood at the center of one of Hollywood's most beloved childhood romances now rests quietly, her name remembered far less often than the character she made famous. Number 11. Rusty Hamer. To television audiences in the 1950s, Rusty Hamer was the lovable son, Rusty Williams, on Make Room for Daddy. For nearly a decade, millions of Americans welcomed him into their homes every week, making him one of the most familiar child stars on television. But when the series ended, so did the career that had defined his childhood. As Rusty grew older, acting opportunities became increasingly rare. Like many former child stars, he struggled to escape the image that had made him famous. He eventually left Hollywood, settled in Louisiana, and lived a much quieter life away from the cameras. While his television fame remained frozen in reruns, the man behind the character slowly disappeared from the public eye. On January 18, 1990, Rusty Hamer died by suicide at the age of 42. His death saddened those who had grown up watching him, but it also highlighted the difficult path many child actors faced after their early success faded. Although his personal struggles were real, there is no evidence that a single event or his television career alone caused his tragic ending. Rusty was laid to rest at Beauregard Cemetery in DeRidder, Louisiana, far from the bright lights of Hollywood. His grave is quiet and rarely visited by the generations who once watched him every week on national television. Today, Make Room for Daddy remains part of classic television history, introducing new viewers to the cheerful little boy named Rusty. Yet far fewer remember Rusty Hamer himself, whose final resting place stands in quiet contrast to the extraordinary popularity he once enjoyed as one of America's favorite child stars. Number 12. Scotty Beckett. Scotty Beckett spent much of his childhood in front of Hollywood cameras. Beginning his career as a young boy, he appeared in dozens of films alongside some of the biggest stars of the 1930s and 1940s. Unlike many child actors, he continued finding work as he grew older, leading many to believe he had successfully escaped the curse that ended so many young careers. Unfortunately, that success would not last. As an adult, Scotty's acting opportunities gradually disappeared. Personal struggles, legal problems, and drug addiction began to overshadow his talent, making it increasingly difficult for him to rebuild his career. The promising young actor who had once seemed destined for a long future in Hollywood slowly faded from both the screen and the public's memory. On May 10, 1968, Scotty Beckett died at the age of 38 from an overdose of barbiturates and alcohol. His death was officially ruled a suicide, bringing a tragic end to a life that had begun with so much promise. By then, the little boy audiences had once recognized had long been forgotten by much of Hollywood. Scotty was laid to rest at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in Mission Hills, California. His grave is modest and receives far less attention than those of many actors who achieved lasting fame during Hollywood's golden age. Today, his films remain part of classic Hollywood history, but Scotty Beckett himself is remembered by relatively few movie fans. His story serves as another reminder that early success could never guarantee a secure future, and that even a child star with years of experience could quietly disappear from the spotlight long before the final curtain fell. Number 13. Billy "Froggy" Laughlin. Long before audiences knew his real name, they recognized his voice. Billy "Froggy" Laughlin became one of the most memorable child stars in our gang, thanks to the raspy, croaking voice that made his character instantly unforgettable. Even today, many fans remember Froggy far more clearly than the young actor who played him. Billy joined our gang in the early 1940s and quickly became one of the series' standout performers. His unusual voice, created as part of the character, set him apart from the rest of the cast and made him a favorite with audiences. Although his Hollywood career was brief, his performances left a lasting impression on generations of viewers. Tragically, Billy never had the chance to grow beyond his childhood fame. On August 31, 1948, he was riding a motor scooter in La Puente, California, when he was struck by a truck. Billy died from his injuries at just 16 years old, cutting short a life that had barely begun. His sudden death shocked fans who still remembered him as the cheerful boy from the screen. Billy Laughlin was laid to rest at Rose Hills Memorial Park in Whittier, California. His grave is quiet and receives far less attention than the beloved character that continues to appear in classic Our Gang reruns. More than 80 years after Froggy first made audiences laugh, his distinctive voice still echoes through old films. Yet few viewers know the story of Billy Laughlin himself, whose promising life ended long before adulthood, leaving behind a legacy remembered more through a character than the young actor who created it. Number 14. Norman "Chubby" Chaney. With his round face and cheerful personality, Norman "Chubby" Chaney became one of the most beloved children in our gang. His nickname fit the character audiences adored, and for a brief time he was one of the series' brightest young stars. But unlike many child actors who struggled later in life, Norman's greatest battle came with his health. As he grew older, doctors believed losing weight would improve his condition and recommended a strict diet. Instead, the rapid weight loss caused serious medical complications. While other child stars were trying to survive the pressures of Hollywood, Norman was fighting a far more personal struggle that had nothing to do with fame. On May 29, 1936, Norman Chaney died at just 21 years old from myocarditis, a serious inflammation of the heart. His promising future had already faded years before, leaving behind only the memories of the smiling little boy audiences had loved on screen. Norman was laid to rest at Baltimore Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland, far from the Hollywood studios where he had once made millions laugh. His grave is rarely mentioned among the resting places of classic film stars, despite his important place in one of the most successful comedy series of the era. Today, our gang continues introducing new generations to the lovable character called Chubby, yet very few viewers know the heartbreaking story of Norman Chaney himself, whose brief life ended long before adulthood, leaving behind a quiet resting place that stands in sharp contrast to the laughter he once brought to audiences across America. Number 15. Robert Weezer Hutchins. Robert Weezer Hutchins became a familiar face to movie audiences through the Our Gang comedy shorts. With his blonde hair, energetic personality and playful charm, he appeared in dozens of films during the late 1920s and early 1930s. For many viewers, Weezer was one of the unforgettable children who helped make the series a Hollywood classic. Unlike several of his fellow cast members, Robert left acting while he was still young and chose a very different path. As World War II unfolded, he joined the US Army Air Forces to serve his country. His life had moved far away from movie sets, and the little boy who once entertained millions had become a young serviceman preparing for a very different future. That future ended far too soon. On May 17, 1945, just months before World War II officially came to an end, Robert was killed in a military training accident when two aircraft collided during a practice flight. He was only 20 years old. He never returned to Hollywood, and his promising adult life ended before it had truly begun. Robert Hutchins was laid to rest at Parkland Lutheran Cemetery in Tacoma, Washington. Far from the film studios where he had once worked, his quiet grave receives little public attention today, despite his place in one of the most beloved comedy series in American film history. While generations continue to enjoy Our Gang, few recognize the name Robert Hutchins. The cheerful boy remembered as Weezer never had the chance to build a life beyond his childhood fame, leaving behind a story that is now remembered by far fewer people than the character he once brought to life. Some of these children rest beneath simple headstones, others have no individual grave at all. Yet every one of them once brought joy to millions before slowly fading from the spotlight. Their stories remind us that childhood fame could be as fragile as it was extraordinary. Which child star surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and if you'd like to discover more forgotten lives and the remarkable stories behind their final resting places, be sure to subscribe and join us for the next journey into Hollywood's hidden history.